Welcome to another episode of Age of Geek. And Blake, they've given us full control tonight. We are totally
I
taking
don't know
over.
why they did that.
No Steph, no Marlee to keep us in line, and we've brought our friend Branden with us. Like, this is nothing but
My
trouble.
goodness.
Watch
What is
out.
happening?
Watch out.
Branden, welcome back
We're
to the show.
We're off the rails.
Already. We're already talking all over each other. I'm sorry. I talked right over you, Blake. That's my bad. Like, I've never done a podcast before.
My goodness.
Yeah. Branden, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm doing really good. I'm excited to be back so soon. Like, I'm kind of shocked that you were like, hey, come talk about this topic that we talked about in the Discord.
Yeah, we had a little conversation about this in the Discord after our last hot takes episode, and we thought this is a great episode in the making. But we have a rule here. So Blake and I have the same birthday, so we need to make sure you have the same birthday. Just say yes.
Yeah, you know, it's the same birthday as someone. I don't know who.
Okay,
but
on the
someone.
count of three, we'll all say the same birthday. Ready?
All right.
1, 2, 3.
January 9th.
January 9th.
No. It's September 11th. Now
Oh.
that everybody knows how to. Next, we're going to talk about our mother's maiden names, right?
Yep. And then next episode will be social security numbers. So you'll want to tune in for that. See, this is how we get people
Definitely.
coming back. We'll give away a piece of our identity every time.
Every time.
We were going to ask you, Branden, how you would feel about going by Drake for this episode, so we could have the whole rhyming thing going through, but we felt like that might be a bit much. Okay, I didn't even clear that with Blake. I just shared that now. So,
You know what? I'm for it.
I just need to figure out how to do that here in StreamYard, and I'll be all over that.
We would never do that to you.
No, never, ever would we do that to you. So
perfect.
Excellent.
We're back doing another hot takes episode, and we kind of said we wouldn't necessarily do book takes every time, but this is another hot book take, and it came from Branden in our discussion. He claims this is the take, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here. You claim that authors are either really good world builders or really good character builders, typically not both.
I mean,
or neither.
Yeah,
if you're
well,
neither,
yeah.
you just don't write
author.
books.
Is that what that
Yeah.
makes them?
Yeah, if they're neither of those things, then why are you reading their book? I don't know, but you know, Stephanie Meyer sold a lot of books, so
Oh,
I actually have an opinion about that one. She's one of the ones on my list.
okay.
So
All right. So is she a world builder or a character builder?
she is clearly a world builder because her characters are, you know, you can generally tell when somebody is a world builder versus a character builder, in my opinion, based on how problematic their characters are unintentionally.
Right.
So I mean, the whole Edward Bella's her name, right? It's been a while since I've read those. They're very problematic together, but it's kind of an interesting world. I mean, it's for the right target market. It's not for everybody, but
right.
I would say the Shattered Plains are not for everyone either.
I would agree with that, and I'm okay with. I've made peace with the fact that not everybody is going to be a big Brando fando like myself, but it's okay.
We're all fans of Branden. I'm Drake right now. I guess that doesn't work.
Well, that's we can fix it. We'll change it back. We'll see how many times we do this through the episode tonight.
My wife asked me. She did say, "Does Branden only like Sanderson because that's his name?" And I was like, "I don't think so, but maybe maybe that's his only thing."
He only reads authors named Branden Sanderson, Branden Mole.
I'm really glad that she thinks so highly of my taste in things.
Yeah.
Well, he only likes it because it's named the author's the same name as him.
Yeah, that sounds like a good Steph opinion, though. Like that sounds.
Yeah, that's why she's not on hot takes anymore.
Yeah. Well, now Marlee's on hot takes timeout with her hot take on Will Wheaton and Star Trek and Big Bang Theory. That put her on timeout for hot takes.
That was bad.
If anybody ever gets a chance to meet him, he is the nicest man in the world. He's just
really?
Yes.
Yeah,
I would imagine he is. Yeah,
I would love for him to come to Salt Lake for FanX or something, but that bridge may have been burned a few years ago.
No, he came. He came after that.
Did he come after that?
Yes. And I got to see him playing with puppies, and it was adorable.
Well, we need him to come back then. I was never a big Wesley Crusher fan. I'm sorry, Will, if you're listening to this. He's not. But if you are, I'm sorry. I was never a big Wesley Crusher fan.
Well, he's definitely not after last episode.
Well, yeah. I'm known for Big Bang Theory. Who is this?
Who are these people?
He's known for being himself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, really, Big Bang Theory was kind of his big... No, it was not. So, okay, world builders versus character builders. I've been thinking a lot about this because what sparked the conversation is we were talking about Brandon Sanderson, and the consensus, as we talked about it, is that he is more of a world builder than a character builder. Is that
for
fair?
sure?
100%.
Okay. And I'm struggling with this because since then I've started re-listening to The Way of Kings.
Of course you did.
Well, it's fine. It's fine. I have like the same 3 books that I go back and listen to over and over again. It's fine.
I was going to say, like, I swear every episode you're like, well, I just started listening to this Brandon Sanderson book again. You must just have them on loop.
Yeah. Well, it is part of my obsession with the name Brandon. There's a reason you've been on this show twice now. So
finally, the name pays off.
Finally. I like his stuff. It's comfort food for me. And when I'm stressed or something, I can put it on and I just know I can escape into that world, which is very well built. But his work on Kaladin in Way of Kings is pretty strong.
Okay, so I will give you that. Like, Kaladin is the one character that I'm like, okay, he is clearly trying to build a character here and not the world.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe he's going to try to do that. I mean, the beautiful thing about the Cosmere is that he's built the world, and maybe now he's going to give us some more of the characters. Like, over time, we've gotten more and more of different characters in the books. How spoilery can we get here?
You cannot spoil Rhythm of War because I'm currently in it.
Okay, so we can't spoil
everything
else.
War. Everything else is fair game.
Okay, so when Kaladin, never mind.
Yeah. All right.
The minifigures, they already spoiled it for me. So
they would.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Sorry, man. We should have warned you not to go look at them.
I didn't think it would spoil anything, but yeah.
In the future, anytime there's something like that, you've got to let us go look first if you're not totally caught up yet, and then we can let you know. Okay, you can go look.
I feel like it's not too big of a spoiler. I mean,
no,
it was inevitable.
We all saw it coming, right?
Yeah, like I don't think there's anything shocking about it.
Okay, so that's the counter argument about Kaladin being Brandon Sanderson's one redeeming character. He's not doing anything that none of us didn't see coming. There's nothing that shocked us. He does have some definite, like, emotional damage that he is working through, and that is really great to see. But it's the same note over and over and over again.
That's fair, and I think that's kind of where you've gone with this before, Blake. You feel that way about not just Stormlight, but all of the Cosmere.
All his books are like rinse and repeat. And it's a good rinse and repeat, right? Like, he has a good method, he has a good system. It makes sense. It's enjoyable to read, it's enjoyable to listen to.
It's like the MCU.
Yeah.
If it works, why change it?
Right? And obviously he's very successful. He's very highly regarded as an author. So who am I to be like, this guy doesn't know how to write? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But
no, I don't think any of us are saying that. I hope not.
Yeah.
Because that is a bold statement coming from 3 people who have never published a book.
Right. But
exactly.
Okay, so that's what actually led me to this hot take initially, is I've been doing a bunch of research into how to write a book. Brandon Sanderson, I don't know if you guys have heard of him. We never talk about him here on this show. But Brandon Sanderson has a course at BYU.
He's written a few things? Okay.
He's written a couple things.
Right.
And he decided to teach a course about it at BYU. The cool thing about this course is he filmed the entirety of it and put it on YouTube.
I've watched it. It's very good.
If you want to learn how to write from Brandon Sanderson, it's amazing. But like when it really clicked to me was he was talking about uh coming up with the outline of the book, and how
Mhm.
the outline of the book isn't what like we're taught about in elementary school. Here's an outline: Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2. But he talks about, and basically he talks about, uh you write down these characters, but everything that he was talking about characters felt like he was talking about you have to tie them into the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, it makes for great fiction. He does a great job of that, but it also is like, okay, that is his viewpoint on that. Because the other outline methods that I've seen, you write about the characters and you don't care about the world. Like
Right.
they didn't say you don't care about it, but it was like nothing in there. Okay, these are the things I usually put in the character sheets. Uh, None of it is usually like this is how they fit into the world. It's just here's this character.
And it's interesting. I think that works really well in the epic fantasy genre that the Cosmere takes place in, right? Like that's all epic fantasy. But when you get into some of his other books, like The Reckoners, that method does not work as well. I don't enjoy The Reckoners nearly as much as I enjoy the Cosmere stuff. And I think part of it is the world isn't as developed because you don't have that same amount of time, the same amount of depth that you get in some of the Cosmere books,
I
and the
might
characters aren't.
I might argue with you on that one a little bit. The Reckoners, that was my gateway into Sanderson,
Okay.
because somebody told me, "Hey, you like superheroes? You should read Brandon Sanderson. Here's a book on superheroes." And it's like, "Oh, give me more of what this guy has to
Right.
write." And in that one, the reason he doesn't spend as much time developing the world is because it's just a slight offshoot from modern times. Like he
Mhm.
is able to draw on a lot of the things that we already have here in this world. And so I think that I think that it's more of the same. He just is able to use some Cliff Notes versions of things because we
Yeah.
kind of know how things feel. Oh, except they were turned into metal.
Yeah. I and I get that. I think that's the reason why he didn't have to develop the world as much. But to me, the Reckoners, the characters not being as well developed stands out to me more than it does in the Cosmere. And I think part of that is because of the world that it takes place in, and it's not that big epic fantasy that I enjoy. But I will say the Reckoner series has one of the best hooks ever. What if everybody that had superpowers was bad? And that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, no. There's a fight scene, an unexpected fight scene that pops up in that first book, where you learn something about a character in there, and it is and to me that's where I was like, okay, Brandon Sanderson is the guy to follow because he can write this action like this. And at the moment I didn't realize that I feel like those big action scenes heavily rely on understanding what's going on in the world,
Mhm.
because it it matters to know, how the consequences are going to lay out. And Brandon Sanderson just does a superb job at that. But I don't know, we could make this the Brandon Sanderson power hour. But do you guys have anything?
So when I thought about like a lot of the fantasy books that I've read, the authors I could think of are all really good world builders and not very good character builders. So I think of like the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan.
And
Great
Brandon
world
Sanderson?
building. Well, finished by Brandon Sanderson. But we'll talk about just books 1 through 11 that weren't written by Brandon Sanderson. But the world that Jordan creates is amazing. The characters that he creates are one-dimensional and really flat.
Yes.
And Tolkien, who is arguably the greatest or recognizes the greatest fantasy author of all time, great world building. I mean, you can't argue that Tolkien did a great job building this world. His
and
characters are not.
and anybody who says otherwise are like, oh, Samwise Gamgee is the best person in the whole world. They're remembering the movies
Yes.
and not the books.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure.
My hot take on the movies versus the books, everything Peter Jackson did character-wise is better than what Tolkien did in the books.
100%. The books are like reading a textbook.
Yeah, very much so. And and if you really want to get the feel, go read the Silmarillion. That is like reading the Old Testament.
So
It
in
really is.
preparation for this, I wanted to see what other people thought were the best world builders.
Okay.
And so I just Googled who's the best world builders. And
Okay.
Tolkien came up as number one for everything. Everybody
Yeah.
says Tolkien's the best. But a very, 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 very close second is Terry Pratchett.
That's the Discworld
And
stuff.
Yep.
Discworld. And I have to show my ignorance here. I recognize the name and I know his stuff, but I haven't read his works. But they say he's just like a god at world building. So have either of you guys read his stuff?
It is one of the glaring holes in my fantasy experience that I haven't read Terry Pratchett yet. And I want to remedy that because I've heard really, really amazing things. But he always has kind of just slipped under the radar and has never been the big mainstream success that like a Tolkien has been. But I've heard those same things.
I mean, when are you going to find the time to do that in your very packed listening schedule of the
Way
entire
of Kings.
Cosmere?
Listen, sometime I'm going to have to step away from the Cosmere and visit Discworld, and I just haven't found the opportunity to do so yet.
So
or made the opportunity is probably a better way to say that.
So with Discworld, I know that I have consumed that at some point somehow because I've read through like the summaries and I'm like, I know this story. This is a story I have consumed before. I don't remember it at all.
Interesting.
And which means I probably read it when I was like 13 and didn't understand the themes and stuff like that.
Well, I guess there's like 40 of them.
Yeah,
like,
there's
it's
a ton.
just massive.
But they're not like 40 Brandon Sanderson sized books.
Yeah. Okay.
See, I have a
smaller.
harder time with that. I wouldn't mind 40 Brandon Sanderson size books versus 40. I don't know how long they are, but 40 100-page books, because so to me, Discworld very clearly has to be a library read. Like this, I have to check out the books from the library and read it because I'm not going to spend my monthly Audible credit on Discworld because if it's only 10 hours long, I don't know how long they are, I'm not getting as much. Whereas if we had a 40 books that were 25 hours long, I'd be like all over that. I listened to the entire we were just talking Wheel of Time series in about 2 months because I was like, yeah, there's like a bajillion books, but they're all super hefty. And so I didn't mind spending the investment in that series. Like, I don't know. That's a weird mental block that I guess I've got.
Yeah, that I've done the same thing though.
Yeah,
I've
that
looked
is
at
a weird mental block you've got.
No, it is. But I might have a similar one because when I look at, so I just pulled up Terry Pratchett, Color of Magic is Discworld Book 1. It's 7 hours and 58 minutes long. I look at that and I think, but that's 40 hours shorter than a Brandon Sanderson book.
That's like a
And that's
chapter.
that's the same price in my mind. And I can't bring myself to do it, which is probably bad of me. But I should remedy it. I should see. And who's the narrator anyway?
Well, I thought it was just super interesting that people put him on par with Tolkien. And not for me to be like, well, I know everything, but for me to be like, I don't even think I've read his works. I couldn't even, like, other than Discworld, I wouldn't even know his stuff.
That and you're not that strange. There's a lot of people who read in that genre that have not read Terry Pratchett.
That makes me feel better. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and there are a lot of people who go to read Terry Pratchett now and are like, this is just a ripoff of blah blah blah. Because it's a lot of themes that have been recycled over the years. Not that I'm sure he recycled some things from some people somewhere, but because it was so influential, it has been picked up. Like, do you remember when John Carter of Mars came out, the Disney movie that completely flopped? The big complaint that I ever heard about that one was, oh, it's just a ripoff of this and this and this, where it was actually based off of the book that inspired that and that and that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's definitely an issue with Terry Pratchett because it's been around for a long time. He's passed on. He's not alive, not with us anymore, but I think he's influenced a lot. And yeah, I do think if you read it now, it'd be like, oh, this is just a ripoff of X, Y, or Z, and it's not. It's the other way around. So
moving on, the next person that got brought up, probably third, Frank Herbert for Dune.
Oh man, and there, I'm
and you and I both agree, Jake, that Dune isn't our favorite. We've tried, and
Yeah.
And people
Branden, where
consider
do you
Dune the
stand on
greatest
Dune?
fantasy book ever written.
Okay,
or science fiction book.
I'm not gonna say greatest fantasy book ever written, but I will agree that he's a great world builder because
Yes.
I can't tell you how many hours I spent as a kid playing the Dune video game, like the RPG-esque video game. And so I do believe like he's built a great world that you can do a lot of really cool things in. The story just isn't there to go with that world. Like this is the thing that separates, I feel like, Brandon Sanderson and the other great world builders from other great world builders is they have enough of a story there to go with the world, because you can build a
Right.
really great world and not have a great story in it.
Yep. I agree. Frank Herbert's Dune is one of those books that I think you have to read on some level just to like say that you've read it. But it's okay to say it's not great. Like it is long, it's tedious, it's hard to get through at times. And I think honestly, I think Tolkien can be the same way, but I like the fantasy world of Tolkien better than I like Dune. And there's enough of a story, like you said, Brandon, there for me to like, I want to see what happens to the Fellowship. I want to see what happens with the ring. I could care less what happens to Paul in Dune. I don't care. If he dies in the desert, like Drago said, he dies. If he dies, he dies. All right.
That's so funny. And then there was one other author that got brought up a lot, and I am not a part of the anime manga world, but Akira Toriyama, and I'm probably saying that incorrectly, the creator of Dragon Ball. People think that's amazing, and I didn't even know that that was like a story. I just thought that was like an anime TV show, but I guess it's a legitimate story. I don't know.
Well, it started out as a manga. Well,
Okay.
to be honest, like the inspiration of it started out as a fairy tale,
Okay.
which then he converted it into a manga, which then got converted into a TV show. And so it's still in you can still buy the manga stuff, but it's really more considered like the TV show now. But
At this
you
point,
know,
yeah.
it's got a big world, it's got a lot to do. I don't know that it's a great world.
Yeah.
Well,
I
I
don't-
thought I was reading about it and I read this and I loved it. They asked him how he plans out his stories, and he said, "There was no planning on my part. I am famous for not planning. If anything, my editor is the one that was forced to put plot points into the story." Toriyama said that Toroshima's blunt nature was the perfect counter to his writing style. It's actually amazing how much this editor contributed to my story. In interviews, he says things like, "I made him write this," or "I decided what should be happening here." And I think that in a way shows how great he was at world building, that he could make a story not even knowing what the story was going to be.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that's interesting that he took it so far that he didn't even plan a story. He just built a fun world to play in and went off of that.
So there is a genre of stories right now that happen that are basically lit RPG is kind of the thing, but they're web serials essentially.
Mhm.
There are sites. The big one that I can think of off the top of my head is Royal Road, where authors go and they write 1 or 2 or 5 chapters a week on their book, and they just post them there, and people support them on Patreon. There are authors who are making amazing amounts of money every month doing that, and they're just writing about their characters, and you can tell a lot of them have no idea how they're going, because you can't end that story when you start making 15 grand a month.
No, you want to keep it going.
I can't end the story now. I've got to keep going. So like I'm reading a book that I'm like on the 8th book, and these are like Brandon Sanderson sized books. That just, it's like, okay, well, every chapter he's getting $1 from 1,000 people, and so he wants to write 4 of those a month. And I
Yeah.
mean, I wouldn't blame anyone. And that's kind of where Dragon Ball Z is at, and a lot of animes, to be honest, is they are just every episode is just, okay, what's the next thing that's going to happen? What's the natural thing that's going to happen when we do this? When X happens, then what is the consequence? And they deal with the consequences a lot. And then they just throw in the random, like, oh, and then an alien showed up to completely change the direction that we were going.
Interesting. I'll go ahead, Jake.
Oh, I was just gonna say I've heard in the writing world that term, are you a planner or are you a pantser? Meaning do you plan ahead or do you write by the seat of your pants where you just kind of go? This guy sounds like he's taking it to the extreme. Like I really had no idea. I think at least someone who considers themselves a pantser, they're not going to outline everything, but they're going to sit down and they have an idea of what they're going to put down on the paper or the computer screen, since almost everybody writes on the computer now. But anyway.
Okay, Blake,
Yeah,
do you have more lists?
Well, I was just gonna say it was interesting to read about him because he's, again, I didn't even know that was a person was behind that world. So, somebody that was very divisive was George R.R. Martin.
Okay.
A lot of people say he's great at characters. A lot of people say he's great at world building. And I thought that was interesting. Again, I think maybe they have the TV show in their head.
Yeah.
And they in their mind they have Tyrion Lannister acting out as an amazing actor, and maybe he's not as good in the books. I don't know. Yeah. What are your guys' thoughts? Have you guys read Game of Thrones?
I've not read it. I have not watched it. I've won a trivia contest on it one time, though.
There you go.
Wow. That's impressive.
With the way pop culture was when that was coming out, if you hadn't heard about it, you were under a rock somewhere.
For sure.
But the thing that I've been told about by somebody who read the books before the show came out was the books were hard because they would split up characters' stories throughout them. And you would inevitably be following some character whose story you just didn't really care about. And so I wonder if that's where the people who are like, I'm a world building fan, I absolutely love this because I'm following all these different people through different parts of the world, loved it, and why he would be so divisive on it. But I'll give it to him because from everything that I've understand about that book is it has an incredibly detailed and well-realized set of complex history and politics and religion. So, I mean, it kind of feels to a lot of people, it feels like a real place, even though it's entirely fictional.
Well, I laughed. Speaking of it feeling like a real place, they just came out with that new one, The House of the Dragon, the new prequel series, and there were some complaints about some of the misogyny in it and whatnot. I don't know, haven't seen it. I'm not here to side one way or the other, but I thought it was funny when someone defending it said, "Well, they want it to be historically accurate. That's the way it was." I know. It was not. I don't care whether it's awful, bad, or whatever, but this is not a real place, so it cannot be historically accurate. That's just not the way history works. So
they had dragons too, dang it. They were misogynistic and had dragons.
But apparently, like you said, Brandon, people have that attachment to it that they feel like it's a real enough place that they can make a claim like that. No, it's historically okay. I don't know. I would be interested to see how many of the fans agree on whether or not he's good at finishing the series. George R.R. Martin.
I would be
it hasn't been completed.
Okay, so that's another thing. That I feel like that is another sign of a world builder.
I agree.
If your author starts a great story and like people there are huge fans and then they can't finish the story, like not even they finish it poorly, but they just don't put out a book, they're a world builder because they don't know exactly how to tie up the character story. Like the King Killer Chronicles, Patrick Rothfuss.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
That is a world building story to the nth degree.
See, I disagree with you. I disagree with you.
Kvothe and Denna are so one note.
The whole thing is all about Kvothe. That's all the book is. Nothing else happens except his story and his growing up and his going to school. Like you read to the end of the book and you're like, nothing, literally nothing happened in that book.
What's the coolest part about that book?
What's the coolest part about that book? That he's got red hair. That's the coolest part about that book. And Seriously. It kills me because I love reading it. And I hate that I love reading it. His prose is really well done.
So I mean, there's all sorts of things about. So to me, the coolest part of that book is sympathy and the magic system,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or maybe it's the martial arts, or maybe it's the fae. It's not both. It's not.
And I can see that's so interesting because when I thought out of all of the fantasy authors that I've read, that's probably epic wise the most character building that's done is in the
I would say
King's
it's character
Chronicle.
driven, but it's not a character builder.
Okay. All
See, right. See. I mean,
Fascinating. I love it.
I
I
don't know,
love the controversy.
Like prove me wrong. Like I'm okay with being proven wrong, or expose me to a different viewpoint, because maybe we're both right. Because this is literature, which means it's art, which means we both can be right.
Yeah. No, we could. Or you could just be wrong altogether, and it's totally fine.
No, if you know, I gave you no options for me being wrong.
No, I just feel like that is, and you may be right. Maybe it's just more character driven, but I feel like we are really getting the development of that character, and that's what the story is really about. However, it hasn't been wrapped up yet, and quite frankly, I'm tired of waiting. So, Patrick, if you're listening,
and we know he is,
of course, along with Will, they're sitting together and listening to this. Maybe Will will read.
I mean, it could be
the last. Let's get that book finished. It gets to the point, I feel bad for Patrick Rothfuss because it gets to the point where his fans, if he says he's playing a game or he's doing anything other than writing, his fans call him out on it. Like, dude, shouldn't you be writing the last book? Like, it's a trilogy. We've gotten 2 out of the 3. It's been 12, 14 years. Like, let's get this done.
Okay, so with Patrick Rothfuss, he's painted himself into a corner.
Yeah.
Because he's talked about how this is, not as Patrick Rothfuss, but as the character in the story who's narrating the story. He's talked about how this is the most important story in the entire world, about how the Ademaru are master storytellers. And so now all of a sudden he has to tie it all together.
Yeah.
Everything he's done, he has to tie together. I feel horrible for the man because anything that he does is going to make fans angry.
I don't know.
I don't blame him at all for not putting something out.
But if he had come out with it like 10 years ago instead of waiting so long, he might have gotten away with it a little bit. But now it's been such a long buildup, and the fans online have gotten so much worse in the last decade than they were 10 years ago. It's awful. True. Like, I don't want to publish anything, not that I'm even close to publishing anything, but I don't want to produce or put out anything because people just rip it apart.
How many podcasts are you on?
Yeah, well, the good news is people have to see or listen to the stuff that you put out in order to have those kind of opinions. And so we're still working on building that up. So.
We're getting there.
Yeah.
Soon Jake will be as famous as George R.R. Martin with his podcasting.
Why would we pick him to want to emulate it anyway? I'm not sure.
Because he made millions off of a TV show. I would be all for that.
He's definitely like the most famous fantasy writer right now.
Oh, I think so. I think you're right. Yeah.
So.
But the hat though, I can't do the hat.
Okay, you won't do the hat, but you do have to grow a beard.
Well, I can. Yeah, that's fine. I have to quit my job, but I can grow a beard.
Well, you think you're going to be as famous as George R.R. Martin and not still have your job?
It's true.
Okay. Anyways, moving on.
I should just quit now. Let me call my boss real quick. I'll be right back.
Do you guys have any other authors that you thought were good world builders? Other people, honorable mentions, J.K. Rowling, George Lucas, which I thought was interesting. Couple others that I don't remember, but
J.K. Rowling's an interesting one. I don't know if I feel like she's more of a world builder or a character builder.
That's what I thought.
I grimaced at first, but I think she is a world builder. I mean,
the world of Hogwarts is pretty amazing.
The Wizarding World is what she's called her franchise now.
Yeah.
And honestly, there's not a whole lot of growth in Harry from book 1 to book 7. He's kind of like, he's still completely reliant on Hermione and Ron to get through whatever he's going through, and just not the amount of growth I think that you would need to see.
Yeah, Dumbledore is a very problematic character, but he's framed as the hero of the story. I don't think she thought all of the way through on her characters. The way that he just discards people, and anyway, sets people up for failure.
I asked my wife what she thinks because she's a big Potterhead, and she said 100% world building, and I thought that was interesting that somebody who's really passionate about it definitely cares more about the world of Harry Potter than the characters of Harry Potter.
Nobody would care about what house they were in if it wasn't a well-built world.
That's a
Right?
good point. Yep,
Right?
I think you're right. Yeah.
So I thought that was a good one. Now,
George Lucas is an interesting one. I have a hard time because we're not talking filmmakers, we're talking authors, but
right.
George Lucas is definitely a world builder. He is not a dialogue writer. No
I
one
hate
should
sand.
ever let him do that again. But I hate sand. It's the worst.
I hate saying
Ursula
Horse
K. Le
everywhere.
Guin.
Disney came up in world building.
Oh, that's
And
not.
I felt like that was kind of cheating because he just took like old stories.
I think it's, and see, now I feel like we're going too outside of what we're talking.
Yeah.
Disney didn't like, when you think about a world builder like a Tolkien or even a Pratchett or Sanderson or Jordan, they're creating one cohesive world where their stories are existing. Disney took a bunch of different stories from our world and fairy tales from our world and just recreated them.
Yeah.
And he did great making them in his Disney. I'm a big Disney nerd, but
And I think that's what people are trying to say is he created a non-fictional world in our world.
yeah,
The world of Disney, you know.
So you're talking like the Disneyland, Disney World experience, as
That
opposed
and
to
all these Disney fanatics and these people that live in the world of Disney. And I thought that was an interesting way of taking the concept of world building.
And the other thing too is Walt Disney, a lot of what we think about in the world of Disney right now came after Walt Disney passed away.
For sure.
He
Like
set
he
the
wasn't really
foundation.
responsible for this.
Yeah. I mean, with George Lucas, again, he's not writing books, but I mean, he was a pretty seminal part of everything Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Disney, I love the guy. He was amazing. But I mean, so much has come since his passing that it's, I don't know. I wouldn't put him in either of these categories because he's not an author. That's where I'm going to stand on Disney.
Deal. Hot take. All right. Then I guess, who do you guys think are the best at character writing? And this one is way harder to find information on. People love pointing out who all the world builders are, but if you're like, who's good at writing characters? The internet's like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's hard because I feel we talked ourselves into a corner a little bit on it, but go ahead.
I found a great theme. Okay. Neil Gaiman.
Okay.
Grant Morrison. Alan Moore. Comic book writers are good at writing characters. And it's because the worlds are already built.
Yeah.
And they have to live within the world that's already been built, but tell a good story. And I thought that was an interesting, I don't know. It was just something that I noticed. A lot of comic book writers kept coming up. But then you have somebody like Stan Lee who created the world.
Well,
arguably.
Okay, time out.
Well, Let's
be clear about what Stan Lee did and didn't do.
He created Spider-Man. He created Fantastic Four. He created the Hulk.
Yeah, but without Jack Kirby and Ditko, like he wouldn't. I mean, they gave him the look.
Well, he filled in the word bubbles, is what he did.
Yeah. And then he found alliterative names to give all of the characters for their secret identities, and that's kind of.
It's just because he had a bad memory, is what he said. He's like, it helped me to remember their names if they first and last name was the same name. That was it. That was it.
I think it's interesting with comics. Somebody had to come up with the idea, and that's the world builder. And then people that moved on later with that same story. It'd almost be like if somebody took Brandon Sanderson's work now and then wrote in it, and they had to write Kaladin again.
So
and it's like, okay, well, I can't just rewrite what Brandon Sanderson wrote, so I've got to come up with my own take on it, and my take will be different than his, and I can't change the world because that's already canon. But what I can change is maybe how Kaladin perceives this world, and I thought that was an interesting way of having good character writing.
And I think with Neil Gaiman he's an interesting example to me because in addition to some of the comic book work that he's done, you look at things like Norse mythology, where he takes Norse mythology that's been established. That world has been built. He's not creating that world, but man, does he flesh out those characters
for sure.
And he builds those characters out.
He's taking history and making it interesting, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of what you were saying, Brandon, is the Silmarillion can kind of come across as reading a textbook, but Neil Gaiman took a textbook and made it a good story.
Yeah.
And he did that through character writing.
Well,
And
I mean,
think
he's got the Greek mythology stories that he's put out, and that one sounds like it should be a textbook, and he just
Right.
Well, like, people loved it.
Well, and you look at like Good Omens, he's taken a lot of these biblical type prophecies and put them into our world, but really it's the two characters that you're really drawn to in that book. The gosh, I can't think of their names now, but the angel and the devil characters in the book. So I think Neil Gaiman's a good.
And I think it's interesting you
example.
bring up Good Omens, because did you know that was a collaboration
With
Terry Pratchett?
Yes, I knew that.
Actually know that.
I thought that was interesting. I'm like, maybe Terry Pratchett did the world building, Neil Gaiman did the characters. Combining it makes a really great story. So I don't know. It kind of came full circle when I saw that. I was like, wait a minute, what? You know?
Also, Neil Gaiman's he comes across as a really cool guy.
He has a character in and of himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are some people that I can't think of specific stories right now, but there's a series of stories that I've read over time. They're not related to each other, but there are themes in my life apparently, and I'm just realizing this one now. AI driven characters, like not created by AI, but the story is about an AI character. Those tend to be more character driven.
Mm-hmm.
Wish I could remember that there was one really good short story where the AI kind of accidentally happened, and the boss was like, just reboot it and it will go back to normal. And the AI runs off at the end, and it's like, oh, that was a really intriguing story. But it was just a short story. But I feel like when people are creating AI based characters that are the main characters of the story, they tend to be more character driven.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know that I've read a lot of books that are like that, but when I think about one of my favorite shows, Star Trek: The Next Generation, starring our good friend of the program, Will Wheaton, like all of the episodes that center on Data are very much about Data and his interaction and his growth and his development as a character. So I think that there's something to that.
Artificial intelligence is a really easy way to talk about the human condition without making anyone too upset.
Yeah.
A book that comes to my mind with that, and I don't know if you would consider him AI, but it's the We Are Bob, We Are Many series.
Mm-hmm.
If you guys haven't, for listeners, and if you guys haven't read it, you nodded your head, so yes, you have. But it's basically a guy. It freezes his body. He has a lot of money. He chooses to freeze his body in a car accident to live to a point when they could fix him, essentially. And he wakes up and they've put his mind in a computer. And then he goes to space in a rocket ship in this computer, and it's just him. And like, that's the world. And so all it is characters. Like he ends up 3D printing other computers, and he puts his brain in those computers, and then those computers become different versions of him. And every time he puts himself in a different computer, he becomes a different person. Anyways, it's an amazing series. I love it a lot. And I thought that was a good example of, just because you said AI, that reminded me of character building in a sci-fi series. So it's really good.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do, and a lot of the AI stuff has to do with, a lot of times they're spending so much time explaining like the technology on how you get the AI that they don't have time to build that world.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Bobaverse very much fits that bill right there.
I kind of think the Ender's Game series. So Ender's Game itself, maybe not so much, but when you get into Speaker for the Dead and Xenocide and Children of the Mind, like those books are very, very character driven. Ender, like post-war, post his time in this military camp and everything, and how he is now and how his character develops. I think that's very character driven. The world's still well thought out, but I don't know that it's world building heavy, even though there are cultures and things that are introduced that are different. It's still very character driven, I think.
Yeah, that one is an interesting one because Speaker for the Dead was actually the one that was written first.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very, and that one, you're right. Those ones are very character driven. But then he went back and he wrote Ender's Game, which was the prequel to that.
Mm-hmm.
And because he had a short story based on just the battle room that he then expanded, and it's interesting because that one is very much, the characters are very one-dimensional. In Ender's
Mm-hmm.
Game, characters are very flat, but the world building is amazing in that. And I know a lot of people who love Ender's Game who
Mm-hmm.
struggled to get into Speaker for the Dead. And so many so that I actually started recommending people to go to Ender's Shadow, because and that's Bean series, and Ender's Shadow goes back into more world building.
Yep.
Versus, and the characters are kind of the same characters that you know and you love. But yeah, the Ender's the last part of the Ender's Game series, Speaker for the Dead and stuff like that, is very much driven straight by like what would doing something like this do to a person.
Yep.
Another thing that kept getting brought up online with character authors is what I would consider like high school English books, like Jane Eyre, Crime and Punishment, The Great Gatsby, just those
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah, those great works of literature that are considered masterpieces, and we study them in school. And I think we study them because of kind of what you were saying, Branden. We're studying the human condition. We're studying historical events in a fictional way. And again, there are things that have already happened. So you can't write, the Great Gatsby. That time era already happened. You can't build the world. It already was built. It already existed. But you can write characters in that time period that would be interesting if you like The Great Gatsby. So
now that said, there's a book series that is an absolute blast to read, that is more on the world building side. It's not bad at the character building side, but it's more on the world building side, from a guy named Larry Correia, and it's called The Grimoire Chronicles. And it is kind of in that time period of The Great Gatsby, but then there's also magic. There's a whole magic system, and how would that tie into the way that world changes. So you can do it. That's what speculative fiction does all the time.
Right.
But you're right. The ones that are about the human condition, which, let's be honest, that's what the goal of the humanities classes are. I mean, it's humanities that to get us to think about the world from other people's viewpoints. So I wonder if that has to do with world building versus character building, because if you have to build the world, you can't explore necessarily how different people see it differently, because that would just be too confusing.
Yeah, I mean, like The Grapes of Wrath, like Steinbeck didn't write that hoping to have magic in it.
No.
it wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't be appropriate. But the characters that he built in that, he was able to tell the stories of that time period and help us experience what those people were experiencing. And I think that's an interesting aspect, that if you're a character writer, you can go the route of like comics, which is like super fictional, or you can go a route that's maybe, not necessarily nonfiction, but a
historical fiction. Yeah. Or not even historical. You can do contemporary fiction.
Yeah.
As well, where, it's just, this is what's happening today. This is the world that I know. So you're not building the world. You're showing the world, but you're not having to build it.
And you're showing the world through your characters.
Right. And that's the only way you can make it interesting.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have to do any of the world building, and then you don't do any of the character building, and you don't make your character interesting, again, why do I want to pick up your book?
Yeah,
You're
then
just
it's
a bad
then
author
it's
at
a
that point.
textbook. Then
Yeah,
it's a textbook, and it's like, why do I want to read this? This is
which
boring.
I spent 12 years in public school and 4 years in higher education avoiding cracking a textbook open. Why would I start doing it now?
Yeah, I don't know. It was just kind of an interesting thing that I kept seeing come up. Is
Yeah.
it's like there's I think it's a lot harder to be a character author than a world building author. I think it's and still be successful and interesting, right?
And I
Is
think
my hot take, I guess.
I wonder if part of the reason why we might struggle a little bit going back and reading some of the classics that are much more character novels is because that style is so different from what we do today. For me anyway, I live in the fantasy world, which is
Right.
probably a problem just in general. But it's hard for me to go back and read like a Dickens or a Jane Austen because it's like, oh, this is so I don't care about their relationships and this and that whatever. Like give me some magic or a dragon or else I'm done reading this book.
Right.
And I just wonder if that's become I think that's why those books are harder for me to go back and visit.
Well, I mean,
That and the pacing is totally different. Like, there was a lot more telling and a lot less showing in those books, but
Steph, my wife really likes Pride and Prejudice, but she'll definitely take Pride and Prejudice in zombies over the original, And so I think, like you said, we live in a world, our generation lives in a world where it's like, yeah, I'm not in school. I'm not going to read this anymore. I'm going to read what I want to read and what interests me. And what interests us is escapism and fantasy and world building,
yeah. I I wonder sometimes because I know growing up for me, reading those kinds of books, reading comics or fantasy books, I was told by my parents it was just like a bunch of nonsense and I was wasting my time. And like now I'm so take my kids to the bookstore and find whatever books they want and I want them to read. And I just feel like maybe that's me pushing back on that upbringing of no, this is a waste of time and it's nonsense. And I don't know. Maybe that was this isn't a therapy session, but I'm there you go. An insight into Jake's mind and the workings of Jake.
I wonder what it is that though has caused us to become such escapist in society. Because I feel like these worlds, like you're 100% right. The reason that I jump into these world building books is because it transports me to somewhere else.
Mhm.
And I don't dislike my life.
Mm-mm.
I'm really happy where I'm at and who I'm married to and who my kids are. Like I've got a good life. Like I can't complain about it at all. But I love jumping into a fantasy world where like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if you could have magic? Whatever the magic system is, whether it's you have to have
Mhm.
a magic wand or like Harry Potter or you use concepts to invest yourself with power. Like it's there's something about that. But if you can understand that you're jumping into a world of somebody else who's exploring a certain condition, do you think that would change things? Because I went through a phase after my a- I was probably 30 years old, and I was like, you know what? For some reason, I want to read a separate piece, and so I read a separate piece, which is a book that I read in high school,
Mhm.
and Ethan Frome, and I jumped into a bunch of the books that I read from high school. I'm like, I like these a whole lot better now than I did when I was in high school, and the difference is I was able to escape into the world and watch the main character essentially. Like, I don't know how you guys read, but to me, I'm creating movies in my head.
Yeah.
Uh, so and so there are times and places, but I don't know, like I can infinitely go back to something in the Cosmere because there's always just something comfortable there.
Oh, I do
Uh,
all the time.
but like Logan was a movie that I enjoyed. It
Mhm.
was good. It made me think, and it explored the human condition. But it's not one that I just turn on because I'm like, oh, what? Oh, let's turn on Logan.
Yeah.
So I think there's something comforting going back to these world building books and
Yeah.
and media in general.
I think you're onto something there, and I know books that I've gone back and read that I had to read in high school. For me, I think what makes those enjoyable is that now I'm choosing to read them. I am not one that does well when somebody tells me I have to do something, like I want to push against it, and so it's different when I go back and I choose to read it. But I also think I'm more mature and I've experienced more of life, so I can see more of myself in the books and in the characters. And I think that that helps. And even when I'm reading these big, expansive worlds that are created by these authors, um, I still see myself in some of the characters, and I can still see parallels between things that I'm doing in life and what's going on in the books. Um, and so even though I'm escaping there, to me, being able to relate it that way helps me take these some of these principles and lessons that I'm learning from the book and adding them to my life and trying to be a better person. And that sounds really weird, but like I manage a small team at work at my job, and reading The Way of Kings recently and listening to it and looking at how Kaladin starts building up Bridge 4. Like, there's some good leadership principles. There's some bad leadership principles as well, but there's some good leadership principles. And while I don't feel like I'm a slave to anyone or anything like that, there's still some experiences where you're like, okay, I've made mistakes as a leader before, and what can I do to improve and to change? And so I think even though I'm escaping into this world, there are still parallels that I can see that help me connect there. I don't know.
I mean, I totally agree with that. Uh, I personally like escaping into comic books. So comic books are definitely my first literature, and then second would be like fantasy genre, sci-fi, that kind of stuff. But superheroes for me, they give me a sense of control, and having a superpower adds a level of control to the outcome of what happens, like you were saying, Brandon, you have a great life. I have a great life. I've got a family. I've got kids. I love my kids. I've got a really good job. There's really nothing bad going on in my life. But there's always that element of like, well, what if something bad could happen? And if you're a superhero, you just get that much of an edge in life to have a little bit more control. And that's why I think I like to live in those worlds, because you can escape to them and it's always going to be good. There's Superman will always win. Kaladin is going to win. Like we were saying at the beginning, like it was a little bit spoiled, that the minifigure, but it was also like, well, we knew that was going to happen.
That was going to happen.
And so I think in these fantasy worlds and these world buildings, like, yeah, I don't think I want to live in Middle Earth. They don't have bathrooms, they don't have electricity. But knowing that little people can win the day, that's a really inspiring thing. And it's a world that adds hope when sometimes our world can kind of seem not hopeful. And I think that's why we escape to those places, and we enjoy them so much.
That makes a lot of sense. You think about To Kill a Mockingbird and the ending there. It's not the world's most exciting book. There's a lot of really bad things that are pointed out in that book. And like, it teaches great lessons, but you're right. You don't have the control. It just highlights how little control you actually have in the world. So while we love our lives, we also don't control them. We just steer them
Yeah.
down like a rapid river, basically. And so I mean, it's the same concept of why kids love playing Minecraft. It's an equitable place with clear rules, and you can build what you want to build. You are in control, and that's what everyone wants. Ultimately, I think you're right. This it's about control. World builders tend to exude control. I wonder. I have not thought about this at all past just 2 seconds ago, but I wonder how many of the world building authors are also control freaks and like to have things done just the way they want to have it done. And I can't write a book in the real world because I want my world to have X, Y, and Z. So I don't know. I'd be interested to get a glimpse into people's personalities. Now, obviously, our favorite world builder, Brandon Sanderson, is clearly the nicest guy in the world.
Right.
But
he could still be a control freak. And he is going to be at FanX. And so, Brandon, I will give you $1 if during his Q&A you ask him if he considers himself a control freak. I would just love to see how
I can be at that panel, if I can be at that panel, I will get up there and ask him that question. I will frame it as, you are one of the best world builders of all time. Does that also mean you like to be in control? And are you a control freak?
Are you in control of your actual world?
Okay. I want to be at that panel to see if Brandon makes it to that panel, because that would be awesome to see that. And the great thing is Sanderson would probably answer the question and like put thought into it and not dismissive of it at all. FanX is coming up next week. Thank you, Brandon and Blake. This has been a great episode. We're hitting the hour mark, so I do want to wrap it up, but FanX is next week. Many of us will be on panels at FanX. Brandon, I think you're on one when I was looking at the schedule.
Yeah, I've got one on My Hero Academia and Quirks. Yeah. Superpowers.
My daughter will probably want to be at that one. She loves My Hero Academia, so we'll probably be in the audience somewhere. I'm on a few panels. Blake is going to be hanging out. Are you on any panels?
I'm a supporter of people that are on panels.
Yeah. I just didn't know if you were on any this year.
No, I'm not on any panels.
Okay. Well, but Blake will be there.
Yeah, I'll be there.
As Brandon said last time that you were on the show, you mentioned that I will stop and record a voicemail recording for you. So by all means, stop me and I'll do that. I'd be happy to. If you say, hey, I saw you on Age of Geek, I want you to record my voicemail message, I'll do it.
I want to see a lot of those.
I would love to see a lot of those.
I want Jake to come up to me angry afterwards. Do you know how many of these I have had to do?
My only request, I'm happy to do it, but you've got to tell me what you want me to say, or at least an idea. So, but we will be at FanX. We hope to see you guys there. And like you mentioned, Brandon Sanderson will be there. I hope to listen to him. He's also going to be there with Dan Wells doing their Intentionally Blank podcast, which if you've not had an opportunity to listen to that, you should. It's really, really entertaining. I like listening to the two of them discuss things. But yeah, we really appreciate people listening. Brandon, your show's coming out soon. KidBot Adventures happening.
KidBot Stories.
KidBot Stories. Gosh.
KidBotStories.com.
KidBotStories.com. Guys, check it out. We've talked about writers. We've talked about AI. This is going to combine both of those things together into kid stories for you. So it's really entertaining. It's really cute and sweet. Your kids will love it. And I just definitely recommend it. I think it's awesome. So Brandon, again, thank you for being our guest. Thank you for the hot takes. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
I've got one more hot take.
Okay, one more hot take.
Jump into Discord and tell us what you think about our hot takes, because those are the best discussions.
I love it. Yes.
Yes, but if you misbehave, Blake will put you in line.
Yeah, no, I've got the I don't know, I'm ready. I was gonna say something bad, but I restrained myself.
We are all active in our Discord, so joining that is a great thing because you will get to interact with us. I don't know if that's a great thing, but we enjoy interacting with each other, so we think you will too.
This week we had a whole discussion about 90s toys and which 90s toy was the best. So if you like that stuff, come talk with us.
Yeah, that's the kind of content you're not necessarily going to get on the show, but you will get in the Discord channel. So
for sure.
All right. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
See ya.
This has been an Age of Geek media production.